DeAndre Hopkins has finally picked a team. We discuss his fantasy value and his dynasty value next.
You are Locked On Dynasty Football, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Here are your hosts, Marcus Mosher and Kate Madjuk.
Welcome back to the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. This episode is brought to you by LinkedIn. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates that you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL. That is linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. I am your host, Marcus Mosher. You can follow me on Twitter at Marcus_Mosher. Joining me today, as always, is Kate Madjuk. You can follow her on Twitter at Kate Madjuk. Kate, DeAndre Hopkins, it's taken a little bit, but he has finally found a home in Tennessee with the Titans. What's your just initial gut reactions to this move?
My initial gut reaction was, what?
Yeah.
Like that was really my total reaction here. And it's on both sides, right? So like the Tennessee Titans are, not a great team, but you suddenly look at this move for DeAndre Hopkins and you have to think that that's signaling that they feel like they're competitive right now. And that's not exactly how we've looked at them. That's not the lens at which we've looked at this team. Like the quarterback situation is an absolute disaster. Like they have so much to work on, but the move for DeAndre Hopkins, you have to imagine that they have some intentions of being in the conversation. And it's not that hard to envision them competing because they are in the AFC South.
Yeah, well, that's the thing and they might have the best coach in the AFC South in Mike Vrabel. Like we love Mike Vrabel. So we're going to talk about the Titans as a whole in a little bit. But as for Hopkins and his dynasty value, right now, according to Dynasty League Football, he is wide receiver 38. I got to believe that's going to go up a little bit because now that we know the destination, but he's always been a volume receiver. Is this the offense that can get him that type of volume?
I don't know, but the thing is, Marcus, there's just no target competition here. So like we'll talk about Treylon Burks and the effect that this might have on his prospects as a wide receiver one, but generally speaking, like Treylon Burks, I don't think of as the centerpiece, the cornerstone of any NFL offense, and
No.
he shouldn't be. But DeAndre Hopkins, like I think he is the perfect kind of addition where, like based on lack of target volume, I do think that, maybe he's not going to hit 160 targets every year, but I do think it's within the realm of possibility given the cast of characters they've put together that like 130, 140 targets seems about right. And if they get the run game right, if DeAndre Hopkins is healthy, if the perfect storm comes together, like we might actually see some efficiency out of DeAndre Hopkins, and maybe this could be less of a volume-based situation. But again, there's so many variables here.
So the good news is that at least with Ryan Tannehill under center, we've seen him, support a really good receiver before in AJ Brown. Now, AJ Brown never got a million targets or whatever, but he was a very efficient receiver. You could do worse than Ryan Tannehill as a starting quarterback, right? For your number one receiver to be attached to. The problem is you could do a lot better. And there's a chance that by midseason or maybe by week 13, as we're kind of getting close to the fantasy playoffs, that it's Will Levis, right? And that's what scares me a little bit, because if you told me, hey, it's Ryan Tannehill for 17 games, I think I would be a lot more excited about DeAndre Hopkins. But with the possibility of Will Levis starting a handful of games, I don't know. I don't know what to think.
That's the interesting thing, right? And like DeAndre Hopkins is DeAndre Hopkins. He is a wide receiver one, and he is the type of wide receiver that will elevate the play of your quarterback. Like Treylon Burks, not there, at least yet. But in DeAndre Hopkins' 5 games with Kyler Murray last season, averaged 20 PPR points per game, over 90 receiving yards per game, almost 10 targets per game. Like he was more efficient when Kyler Murray was on the field, but it's those splits in the games without him that, of course, have us concerned. 63 receiving yards per game without Kyler Murray under center. Just he struggled, and you know what? He had at least 10 targets, and every single one of those games had 0 touchdowns in that span without Kyler Murray. Like we just saw a big drop in that efficiency. So what do we expect outside of Ryan Tannehill? I don't know. And that is going to be the question mark. But I kind of feel like those question marks are going to make him a value. When push comes to shove, I still think DeAndre Hopkins has it in him to be at the very lowest, a high-end upside wide receiver too, with wide receiver 1 upside on any given week.
The Titans have had a very interesting history with some of these receivers that are past their prime, but trying to squeeze a couple good years out of them. Randy Moss, Andre Johnson, Julio Jones, the most recent one. Is there any fear at all that DeAndre Hopkins is, I don't want to say washed because that's just mean, but like we're kind of past the days of him being a difference maker?
I don't have those concerns whatsoever. Like DeAndre Hopkins, he is a wide receiver. We know wide receivers can generally play much longer into their careers. But again, like when we saw DeAndre Hopkins play with a competent quarterback last year, he was producing as an elite wide receiver. Those 90 receiving yards, 90 plus receiving yards per game. I mean, he very well, it could have been on pace for like a 1,500 yard season if we pace that out over 17 games. Like this, I don't think he's washed. I think he's been kind of a victim of some bad situations. It's just a question of whether or not the Titans can be the cure for that. And I do think as long as Ryan Tannehill is the quarterback, yes, fine. But once he steps off the field, you have to be very, very concerned. But
well, I would also say, Kate, the difference between Hopkins compared to those other receivers I just mentioned, Randy Moss, physical freak, Julio Jones, physical freak. Andre Johnson was 6'2", 230 pounds, and ran in the 4.4s. Hopkins has never been that athletic. Like he ran in the mid 4.5s coming out of school. Like his game just has never been based off speed. It's been route running, being able to play in contested catch situations. So maybe his
giant triple XL,
yes,
XXXL hands, like best hands in the league, man.
Yes, I'm thinking that there's a possibility that his game ages a little bit better than those players.
Yes.
But we should also look at some of the trends. Like over the last 3 years, averaging just over 11 yards per catch. He's just not going to be somebody that makes a lot of plays after the catch. So he does need that target volume. And I do think in Tennessee, while the rest of the target competition isn't great, it's just how many times in an ideal world is this Titans team going to be throwing the ball? Like 25, 26 times?
I mean, I think those are all extremely valid concerns. And, we, even from like an efficiency standpoint, last year, yards after the catch per reception, like every single year we've started to see, over the last 3 years, a decline in, his PFF receiving grade, yards per, like everything has declined. But I find it really hard to hold that 2022 season against him when there were a lot of other factors at play here. And I do think his game will age just a bit better, than maybe some of those receivers who are, their game is based on the athleticism and not necessarily like those small things that DeAndre Hopkins does absolutely perfectly, that sets him apart from some of these wide receivers. I just think like when he's on the field, I don't see a world in which he's not at least a wide receiver too. Like I think he is a buy. The biggest issue is we're going to have to try to figure out where this market actually lands and what does the price tag for DeAndre Hopkins look like? Because I think I haven't seen any dynasty trades yet. in any of my leagues where DeAndre Hopkins has actually been traded since this trade. But I have to imagine that he's still going to be a value as long as he's on the field.
The player that I think is going to be impacted the most from the signing of DeAndre Hopkins is Treylon Burks. What is his current dynasty value? We get to that next. This episode is brought to you by LinkedIn. These days, every new potential hire can feel like a high-stakes wager for your small business. You want to be 100% certain that you have access to the best qualified candidates available. That's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the right people for your team faster and for free. It's so easy to create a job post. You put it on there, and then all you have to do is add your job, and then the purple hiring hashtag, the purple hashtag hiring frame, to your LinkedIn profile to help spread the word that you're hiring. Simple tools like screening questions make it easy to focus on the candidates with just the right skills and experience, so you can quickly prioritize who you'd like to interview and hire. It's why small businesses rate LinkedIn Jobs #1 in delivering quality hires versus leading competitors. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates that you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedonnfl. That is linkedin.com/lockedonnfl to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. All right, we are back here in the Locked On Dynasty podcast talking about the addition of DeAndre Hopkins. I want to talk about Treylon Burks, the first-round pick from the 2022 draft. Up until this week, he was being drafted as wide receiver 23. I got a feeling that's going to fall a little bit, Kate, and I am buying Treylon Burks. What are your thoughts here?
I'm all over buying Treylon Burks. And it really just comes from this idea that like Treylon Burks, loved him coming out of the draft, a true athletic freak. When you look at his size and what he can actually do, in the speed he has, especially in relation to his size, after the catch, he's an absolute monster. I think that the addition of DeAndre Hopkins takes off a lot of that pressure for maybe Burks to be, a true alpha wide receiver one. Let DeAndre Hopkins play along the outside and get Treylon Burks back playing in the slot a bit more, and let him do those things that he's really good at, like getting the ball in his hands and seeing what the heck he can do in the open field, especially once you've got an established run game and a true wide receiver to divert some of that coverage. I think this is going to be Treylon Burks' moment to shine. Honestly, the pressure's off, and this is an opportunity, I think, to help him do what he does best, which is that yak ability that makes him so special and made him so special to have this team invest in him in the first round in 2022.
Yeah, I think this is perfect, right? You can now play Hopkins on the outside. You have a viable threat there. You're going to run the ball. And now Burks becomes the guy that you move all around in the formation. I think the Titans are going to play a lot of 2 wide receiver sets. And again, Hopkins will be the X. And then, Burks is the guy that you motion in the backfield. You have him line up as a tight end. You play him in the slot, make him that kind of power slot where he's getting matched up against linebackers and safeties. Again, it's really a 1-year signing for DeAndre Hopkins. We'll see if he makes it to year 2, but I don't think this should impact your thoughts on Treylon Burks in Dynasty at all. Now, I understand some people, like in redraft leagues, were hoping that he was just going to get 1 million targets. I just don't ever think that was realistic. Like, he was just never going to get 120 targets. I think now 80 to 90 targets, still realistic, but maybe more efficient. And maybe, we see him have these stretches where he's averaging 60 yards from scrimmage every single week. I'm still buying Treylon Burks anytime I can get him outside the top 20, 22 receivers.
Yeah, I think this is just a moment where, you buy the dip, because I don't think there's not a ton of risk, right, with Treylon Burks.
No.
Like when you look at what his ADP is probably going to do, it's going to drop, of course. Wide receiver
Only a couple
23.
spots, I'm going to assume, right?
Yeah, but we're still talking about a 23-year-old wide receiver going into his second season in the NFL. And, as we have like Chig Okonkwo and this offense actually starts to develop and we get some more weapons, like all of that pressure, I think is going to be a huge weight off Treylon Burks. And, I didn't necessarily think he was like the most polished and refined wide receiver coming out of Arkansas. I think this is an opportunity for him to uh, enjoy some of that
He's not
lack
going
of
to be pushed
pressure.
into a role that he's not ready for, right? It just feels
Yes,
like
like
this is
it
so much
felt
better
like
for him.
it was like a premature, like I know the team basically swapped, we'll take AJ Brown for Treylon Burks straight up, but obviously like Treylon Burks was not in that tier and he was not nearly ready
No.
to assume the role of wide receiver one. He's not to the point where he can elevate a quarterback's play like a DeAndre Hopkins can, and that's going to be so good for the offense all around. It's going to be good for Derrick Henry to have some other threat besides Derrick Henry on the
Yes.
field. It's going to be huge for the entire team. But um, anything with like Chig or
Well, I was actually going to mention him because I do think it maybe hurts him a little bit just because we're going to see Hopkins get, a lot of targets. Burks is clearly going to be second in the pecking order. I do think it hurts Chig a little bit. One of the values that one of the things that we liked about him so much and why we thought he was a value was because he was so efficient last year, unlimited targets. Now I just wonder, is he going to be like too inconsistent week to week where you're just never going to feel comfortable starting him because you don't know, hey, is this a 3-target game for him? Is it a 7-target game for him? Is it based off of whether we think they're going to be down in a lot of games? I do think this knocks him maybe a little bit.
Yeah, I think that's fair. Part of what made him so exciting was definitely that potential for the target volume. And, I do think like we should be very encouraged by his efficiency. So, maybe to hit that like tight end one fringe, spot, he might not need a ton of targets if he continues to be efficient. DeAndre Hopkins, I do think is going to help that efficiency. Um, there's a lot of things to consider here. Um, one last thing before we take our next break. What about Ryan Tannehill? Because could DeAndre Hopkins be the thing that makes Ryan Tannehill a potential value in super flex leagues as your QB2?
Do you know where Ryan Tannehill is being drafted in dynasty leagues right now?
Probably close to undrafted.
Yeah, he's not. He's not being drafted
Yeah.
at all. So, sure. I mean, I think what this says to me more than anything is that the Titans are going to try to be competitive, right? Mike Vrabel does not like to lose. He's got a little bit of that Mike Tomlin in him. Like he's going to drag his team to be competitive at the end of the season by hook or by crook, right? Like he's going to figure it out. And I think Ryan Tannehill gives them the best shot to do it. We know he's athletic. We know he can run. We've seen him be very efficient before. He led the NFL in passer rating and yards per attempt back in 2019. Now that was with Arthur Smith running the offense, but I do think there's a chance for Ryan Tannehill to be like a sneaky good QB2 this year if the offensive line can hold up.
If the offensive, but
That's the
hey,
thing.
he's got a little bit of wheels, but back in 2020, 2021, back-to-back finishes as a top 12 quarterback.
Yeah, exactly.
Obviously saw
it wouldn't be a stretch
in 2022, but
it would not be a stretch to see him be like the 15th best quarterback in fantasy this year. And nobody's going to love playing him. Nobody's going to be excited about drafting him or trading
No.
for him. But you could do a whole lot worse than Ryan Tannehill as your super flex quarterback. And I think that's probably ultimately what DeAndre Hopkins was looking at. Like, hey, do I go to a bad situation with a bad quarterback, or do I go with a decent quarterback and get paid a lot of money? Yeah, let's do that. That sounds like a pretty good plan. Kate, I want to talk to you about the rest of this Titans offense and if we're just in on it or kind of out as we get closer to the season. We will get to that next. We want to thank you for making Locked On Dynasty your first listen every day. Everydayers, Matt and Ryan will be back on Tuesday and Wednesday. They're going to continue to talk about some off-season strategies, so make sure you guys tune in for that. Kate, you and I will be back on Thursday, and I believe maybe Friday this week. We still have to iron out all those details, but we're going to see you guys all week long. Kate, to wrap up here, I want to talk about just this offense as a whole. Do you think the Titans are going to be a really bad offense, or do you think there's some chance that, maybe we see Derrick Henry finishes the top 5 or 6 running back again. Maybe we see this offense, outperform expectations a little bit.
I do think this team is going to outperform expectations. I think there's a lot DeAndre Hopkins, I don't want to overstate this enough. He changed everything. Like
He did.
he completely changes the perception of this entire team from quarterback down to, their second and third wide receivers. Like suddenly Kyle Phillips as your wide receiver 3 doesn't seem as bad when you have DeAndre Hopkins as your wide receiver 1.
You just knock everybody down a rung and it suddenly looks so much better.
It looks a lot different. Now, we saw like a slight improvement in the Tennessee Titans Super Bowl betting odds over on FanDuel Sportsbook. They're at plus 6,000 now. I believe like last week, before we really got into these rumblings, I want to say they were around like the plus 8,000 mark. So we are seeing a little bit of improvement in their Super Bowl odds. Not much. But I do think the fact that like this team is suddenly kind of coming together is great. The biggest thing for me is definitely going to come down to the offensive line. Like there's so many issues there. I don't know, if we're going to see same old Derrick Henry. Luckily, like it just takes one stiff arm and he's gone. But he could be facing a lot of stiff arms if the offensive line allows contact for him right out of the gate. And I think that's a real possibility here. But there's no doubt that I think like they very easily could outperform expectations. Well, it's not like the defenses here in the AFC South are anything to write home about either.
And remember, they almost won the division last year with Josh Dobbs starting the last 2 games of the season, right? Like their quarterback situation was so bad because Tannehill was out. Remember that Malik Willis started 2 games. Absolutely horrendous. Yeah. Josh Dobbs played, and that was actually pretty good in that game against Jacksonville. They were not far away from hosting a home playoff game last year. And I know everybody's in on Jacksonville this year for good reason. They've got the best quarterback in the division. They've got a lot of exciting playmakers. But this Titans team just finds ways to keep games close. And I think that's why I'm still a little bit in on this offense is I just don't see them being a non-competitive team. I see them being in a lot of close games, being able to stick with the run, being able to be balanced on offense. And I think with Henry, with Hopkins, and now Burks giving them, maybe 6 or 7 touches a game, giving them an explosive element to this offense, I kind of think everybody across the board might be undervalued here in Tennessee.
Yeah, and I hate to say it because now I feel like I'm going to jinx it, but in my redraft leagues, I'm probably going to have a lot of Tennessee Titans, which is not something I wanted to say heading into the 2023 season. But
they're cheap. They're cheap.
You got to chase. And you know what? Like the same thing for the Houston Texans. Like we had this conversation back when we did our Dynasty buy sells for the Texans. And you look at the potential value there. You look at the team. It's not a sexy team. You don't expect them to be overly competitive, but that tends to be where really nice buy windows come for some of these dynasty assets when you believe in the talent. And I think that might be what we see here with the Tennessee Titans. Like even Will Levis, a guy I think a little bit higher on for fantasy than some of our other Locked On Dynasty cohorts, including yourself. Because I really like some of that like mobility. He's got the arm strength, but the mobility cannot be understated. And suddenly, if he's throwing to DeAndre Hopkins, that gives me a little bit more hope that he might be able to pull together a decent fantasy game and supplement enough on the ground that suddenly he's kind of intriguing. Like there's gonna be a lot of question marks, but I don't think there's a ton of risk investing in this team from a dynasty perspective. That sure, go trade for a Treylon Burks, a Chig Okonkwo, like. Because you don't really know what this is. You could be sitting on a gold mine.
Yeah, and there's just a chance because I'm going to keep saying this. Mike Vrabel's pedigree is so good that he just makes this team competitive. What if the Titans do win the AFC South and they're up in a lot of these games, and all of a sudden that offense is getting back to being as efficient as it was in 2018 and 2019? Maybe we'll see it. Well, no, who knows? But this is a team that I'm at least very intrigued with. Kind of going into training camp, going into the preseason. I'm going to be curious to see how the signing of DeAndre Hopkins shifts the values of Tannehill, Treylon Burks, Derrick Henry, and the rest of the supporting cast over the next month or so. That is it for today's show. We want to thank you for making Locked On Dynasty your first listen every day. We are free and available on all platforms. Go check out our show on YouTube as well. Go follow Kate on Twitter at Kate Madjuk. I'm at Marcus_Mosher. Matt and Ryan will be right back here tomorrow. We'll see you guys later this week.